All right, let's jump right in. I want you to seriously think about this for a second. How does a wildly chaotic mythological story, I'm talking hiding sun goddesses, bizarre incestuous sibling relationships, and monstrous eight-headed serpents, actually become the bedrock for a real, breathing, functioning empire? It sounds like pure fiction, right? But to the original audience, this wasn't some fairy tale. It was a serious, absolutely undeniable historical and political document.
Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're tackling the Kojiki, Japan's oldest surviving written record. Compiled way back in the early 8th century, it is literally the cornerstone of Japanese mythology and the foundation of the entire imperial lineage. But as students of history, we have to look past the monsters and the magic, right? We have to ask ourselves, are we looking at a divine myth here, or are we looking at a highly calculated piece of political propaganda? Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with Japan's oldest written record, move into the divine creation narrative, then explore deities, monsters, and secret relics. After that, we'll look at bridging myth and human history, and finally wrap up with the political propaganda engine.
Part 1. Japan's oldest written record, the blueprint of an empire.
So the Kojiki, which translates to Record of Ancient Matters, was finished in 712 AD. It was compiled by a court official named Sumaru. And the really fascinating part? He was actually transcribing oral traditions that had been painstakingly memorized by a highly intelligent attendant named Hiedano Are. The text itself is neatly divided into 3 distinct volumes, and you'll see this structure is highly intentional. Volume 1 deals entirely with the heavenly gods, establishing divine sovereignty. Volume 2 acts as a bridge, dealing with demigods and the very first legendary emperors. It's the bumpy transition from heavenly rule down to earth. And finally, Volume 3 strips away almost all the magic. It basically becomes a bureaucratic human history of the 16th to the 30th rulers. You can literally track the text as it evolves from a cosmic origin story right into a political ledger.
Moving right along to Part 2, the divine creation narrative, or, stirring the primordial soup.
To understand the politics, we first have to understand the universe they built. Before there was an empire, there was just primordial chaos. Drifting, formless chaos. From this, several generations of gods emerged, finally culminating in the last 2 primordial siblings. The male Izanagi and the female Izanami. The older gods actually tasked them with forming the physical world, and the creation of the Japanese islands was intensely visceral. Izanagi and Izanami stand on the floating bridge of heaven. They pierce the chaotic sea below with a heavenly jewel spear, and they stir the thick, glutinous brine. When they draw the spear up, the salty drips pile up to form the first island, Onogoro. They descend to this island to procreate and birth the rest of the islands. But their first attempt is a complete failure. It results in what they call a leech child. Why? Because during their courtship ritual, the female, Izanami, spoke first. They actually had to go back, consult the older gods, and do it again to ensure the males spoke first. So even out here in the cosmic realm of the gods, the text is already establishing strict social and patriarchal hierarchies.
Now, what's absolutely fascinating about this next part is how it sets up human mortality. It gets pretty dark, honestly. Izanami gives birth to the fire god, is severely burned, and actually dies. She descends to the land of Hades, the underworld. A heartbroken Izanagi follows her into the pitch black. But when he lights a flame to look at his beautiful wife, he doesn't see her. He sees a rotting corpse swarming with maggots and 8 thunder deities. Horrified, he just bolts. Izanami is enraged by her shame and she chases him. He barely escapes, blocking the entrance to the underworld with a massive boulder. From behind the rock, she curses him, vowing to strangle 1,000 of his people to death every single day. Izanagi counters right back, declaring he will cause 1,500 to be born every day. And boom. Just like that, the ancient Japanese explanation for the human cycle of life and death is completely cemented.
Which brings us to Part 3, deities, monsters, and sacred relics, the birth of the royal pantheon. So Izanagi escapes, but he's literally covered in the pollution of the underworld. He needs a serious cleanse. He strips down at a river mouth to perform a purification ritual, and as he washes the filth of the underworld away, new deities are spontaneously born from his discarded clothes and the water he's bathing in. But the crucial moment happens when he washes his face. Washing his left eye births Amaterasu, the glorious sun goddess. Washing his right eye births Tsukuyomi, the moon god. And washing his nose? That births Susanoo, the turbulent, unpredictable god of the sea and storms. Izanagi divides the world up among them, giving Amaterasu the plane of high heaven, but Susanoo, who is just missing his mother, weeps until the mountains wither, entirely refusing to rule the sea.
And Susanoo, he basically goes on a divine vandalism spree. Before being banished, he heads up to heaven to say goodbye to his sister Amaterasu. But he ends up going on a massive rampage. He destroys her rice fields, he literally defecates in her sacred palace, and for the final straw, he drops a flayed horse through the roof of her sacred weaving hall, causing one of her maidens to die of shock. Amaterasu is terrified and furious. So she barricades herself inside the heavenly rock dwelling, basically a cave. With the sun goddess hidden away, the entire world is plunged into eternal darkness and total chaos.
So, with the world in pitch black, the 800 myriad gods are totally panicking. They need the sun back. So they come up with a plan right outside the cave. They build a mirror, craft some jewels, and basically throw a massive, noisy party. The goddess of entertainment, Amino Uzume, overturns a tub, dances wildly on top of it, and performs a comedic striptease, exposing her breasts. The 800 myriad gods just roar with laughter. Now Amaterasu, sitting all alone in the dark cave, hears this uproar and gets curious. She peeks out, asking how they can possibly be rejoicing when the world is dark. They tell her a god even greater than her has arrived, and they thrust the newly made mirror right in front of her face. Fascinated by her own radiant reflection, because she's never actually seen a mirror before, she steps out just far enough for a strong god to grab her and pull her back into the world. And just like that, light is completely restored.
As for Susanoo, there are consequences. He's heavily fined, his beard is cut off, his nails are pulled out, and he is fully banished from heaven down to the land of Izumo on Earth. But here, the Kojiki actually gives him a bit of a redemption arc. He meets an elderly couple weeping because a monstrous 8-headed, 8-tailed serpent has already eaten 7 of their daughters and is coming for the final one. Susanoo sets a trap. He builds a fence with 8 gates, placing a vat of highly refined sake at each one. The serpent shows up, drinks the sake, and completely passes out. Susanoo then hacks the monster to pieces, and when his sword strikes the creature's middle tail, the blade actually chips. He cuts open the flesh and discovers a magnificent great sword hidden right inside the monster.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, cool stories, but so what? Well, these myths aren't just entertaining folklore. They are the origin stories of physical items that legitimize real-world power. The mirror used to lure Amaterasu out of the cave, the sword pulled from the serpent's tail, and the curved jewels worn during that divine dance, these become the 3 sacred treasures of Japan. According to the text, these artifacts were passed down directly to the earthly emperors. Even today, they are the literal proof of the emperor's status, passed down during successions. They are kept so intensely sacred that not even the emperor himself is allowed to actually look at them.
All right, part 4, Bridging Myth and Human History, the Descent of the Sun's Lineage.
This is where we hit a massive pivot in the text, moving right into Volume 2. This is where we bridge cosmic myth with human history, following the descent of the sun goddess's lineage down to Earth to take control. Amaterasu looks down at the earthly world, which is currently being ruled by the descendants of her brother Susanoo over in Izumo, and she decides it's just too chaotic. She decrees that her own lineage should be the ones to rule the Earth. Now, the Kojiki presents a narrative where heavenly messengers are sent down, and through this mix of divine intimidation and peaceful agreements, the Izumo deities willingly surrender their land to Amaterasu's descendants. And this brilliantly illustrates the tension we study in history. Historically speaking, the Yamato dynasty absolutely didn't get their power through polite, divine negotiations. They militarily subdued and conquered powerful rival tribes like the Izumo to forcibly unify Japan. The Kojiki is basically taking bloody historical conquests and rewriting them as a smooth, divinely mandated transition of power. So, following this supposed divine handover, Amaterasu sends her grandson Ninigi down to Earth. And a few generations later, his great-grandson emerges as a man known as Emperor Jimmu. He is recognized as the legendary first emperor of Japan, said to have ascended the throne way back in 660 BC. Notice what the text just did there. It drew a direct, unbroken genealogical line from Amaterasu, the sun goddess, straight down to the current Yamato rulers sitting on the throne in the 8th century.
Now, you're probably wondering, if these emperors are literally descended from immortal gods, why do they get sick? Why do they die at all? Well, the Kojiki has a rather clever mythological justification for this historical reality. When Ninigi first came to Earth, a mountain god offered him his 2 daughters in marriage. One was incredibly beautiful, named Blossom. The other was, well, quite ugly, named Rock. Ninigi rejected the ugly sister and chose to only marry Blossom. The mountain god was absolutely furious. He explained that if Ninigi had married Rock, the lives of the heavenly sovereigns would have been eternal and unmoving as the rocks themselves. But because he only chose blossom, the emperors would flourish beautifully, but their lives would be as frail and fleeting as cherry blossoms. It's basically the perfect narrative excuse for the mortality of these supposedly divine rulers.
Which leads us nicely into part 5, the political propaganda engine, history written by the victors. Okay, now we arrive at the absolute core of our explainer today. This entire text is a marvel of ancient statecraft, a political propaganda engine where history is literally being rewritten by the victors. The crucial point you have to take away is this quote. Its primary goal was not historical accuracy, but political legitimation. By 712 AD, the Yamato court was actively trying to consolidate absolute power. They needed a unifying narrative to prove to all the other rival aristocratic families why the Yamato were unequivocally the ones meant to be in charge. The Kojiki wasn't published as some fun collection of folklore. It was mandated and published as undeniable official history.
You'll notice the text spends what feels like a staggering amount of time tracing these insanely complex lineages for almost every single deity mentioned. This isn't just obsessive world building on their part. Those genealogies are highly political. Almost every prominent aristocratic family existing in that 8th century court had their lineage traced back to one of the specific deities in the Kojiki. And what did those deities do in the myths? They pledged their eternal loyalty to Amaterasu and her descendants. By baking the Yamato clan's supremacy into the very creation of the universe itself, the Kojiki demanded political compliance. The logic is simple. Your family must serve the emperor today because your ancestral god served the emperor's ancestral god at the literal dawn of time.
As we wrap things up today, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over for our next discussion. We've all heard the saying that history is written by the victors. But what happens when those victors claim to be actual gods? The Kojiki isn't just some ancient story of the supernatural. It is a masterful, deeply calculated blueprint of power that cemented an imperial lineage so deeply into the cultural psyche that the dynasty still exists to this very day. Keep that incredible tension between myth and historical reality in mind as you review your notes. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.